Hello everyone and welcome to this Forth Valley and West Lothian RIC supported study resource. This lesson focuses on SQA revision support for the extended response questions in this year's SQA Higher Biology exam. The learning intentions for today's lesson are to develop our understanding of key areas including crop protection, animal welfare, metabolic pathways and metabolism in conformers and regulators, and to enhance our confidence when answering extended response questions on these key areas. In order to achieve these learning intentions, we must meet the following success criteria. I can explain in detail the chemical and biological control of weeds and pests. I can describe in detail the aspects of animal welfare. I can describe features of metabolic pathways, types of metabolic pathways, and the roles of proteins embedded in membranes. I can describe regulators and explain the process of thermoregulation. Throughout this lesson, you will see various symbols on the slides to indicate what you should do. Here are the symbols that may be used, and you will find them in the bottom right-hand corner of each slide. Either listen to the information being given, read the information, write or copy a note, pause the video to complete a task on your own, and then a tick to show it is time to correct your work. There is quite a lot of notes to take throughout this session, but you can judge what you require or don't require based on notes you may already have. The SQA have released revision support based on this year's exams. For higher biology, this consists of the key areas covered in the extended response questions. As you can see, you will have the choice of 2 4-mark questions and a choice of 2 8-mark questions. You will answer 1 4-mark question and 1 8-mark question in the exam. The 4-mark questions state that you should know chemical and biological control of weeds and other pests in detail, or you should know animal welfare in detail. Do not worry about the yellow highlighted section. This was just a previous mistake that was corrected by the SQA on the document. For the 8-mark question, you should know either features of metabolic pathways, types of metabolic pathways and proteins embedded in membranes, or you should know regulators and thermoregulation in detail. This lesson will cover all the information you require to answer these questions in detail to achieve maximum marks. This year's Higher Biology exam will take place on Thursday, the 19th of May. It consists of 2 papers. Paper 1 is a multiple choice paper and takes place from 9 until 9:40. Paper 2 will contain the extended response questions detailed in the previous slide, as well as a variety of other questions. This paper takes place from 10:10 until 12:30. Let's now look at both options for the 4-mark extended response question. I am going to talk you through the content involved in answering both of these questions. Remember, you will only need to answer one of these in the exam. Feel free to take any notes required. Let's firstly talk about chemical and biological control of weeds and other pests. What are weeds and pests? Weeds essentially compete with crop plants for essential resources such as light, water and minerals, whilst pests are responsible for damaging crop plants. There are 2 main categories of weeds, annual and perennial. Annual weeds complete their entire life cycle in 1 year, and perennial weeds live for several years, becoming dormant in winter and growing again in the spring. Most of the pests that are responsible for damaging crop plants are invertebrate animals such as insects, nematode worms, and mollusks. They cause damage to crops by feeding on them. This can in turn reduce the rate of photosynthesis and therefore reduce the yield of that crop. So how do we control weeds and pests? We can use chemical or biological methods of control. Firstly, let's talk about chemical control. Pesticides is probably a word that a lot of people have heard before. Pesticides are used by farmers to control weeds and pests. The word pesticide is an umbrella term that includes all the chemicals seen on the screen. Herbicides are used to kill weeds, fungicides to kill fungal diseases, insecticides to kill insects, molluscicides to kill mollusk pests, and nematicides to kill nematode pests. There are two main types of herbicides. Remember, herbicides are a type of pesticide used to kill weeds. Herbicides can be either selective, which means they only have a greater effect on certain plant species, mainly broad-leaved weeds, or they can be systemic, which means they are able to spread through the vascular system of plants and prevent regrowth of that weed. Chemical control of pesticides can have a variety of problems. Firstly, pesticides can be toxic to non-target species. This means they could end up harming or killing an organism that it wasn't intended to kill, especially if animals are eating the plant after it has been sprayed with pesticides. Secondly, using pesticides frequently can result in populations of pests becoming resistant to that pesticide, which means the pesticide will no longer have an effect. Thirdly, pesticides are persistent in the environment, which means they cannot be broken down in the bodies of animals. This results in something called bioaccumulation and biomagnification of the pesticide. Bioaccumulation is the build-up of a chemical in an organism, which can be lethal. Biomagnification is an increase in the concentration of a chemical moving along trophic levels in a food chain. Another way to control weeds and pests that doesn't involve chemicals is biological control. Biological control is the control of a pest population by the introduction of a natural enemy. This enemy could either be a predator, a parasite, or a pathogen. A simple example would be that most farmers will have an owl in their fields to control mice populations. Owls are a natural predator of mice, so will catch and eat the mice before the mice get a chance to eat the farmer's crops. This prevents the farmers using pesticides to kill the mice. But biological control isn't entirely foolproof. Biological control comes with a level of risk, which can see the control organism become an invasive species, become a parasite of another species, prey on another species, or become a pathogen of another species. An example of this is the cane toad in Australia, which was introduced as a natural predator of the cane beetle, which was destroying sugarcane plants. However, this cane toad has now completely taken over Australia and is now a predator of the majority of species in Australia's wildlife. Let's now go on and look at the other 4-mark question, animal welfare. So what is animal welfare? Animal welfare refers to both the physical and mental well-being of animals. There are two main types of farming that are commonly spoken about: intensive farming and free-range farming. Intensive farming is much less ethical due to poor animal welfare. Despite this poor animal welfare, intensive farming is often more cost-effective, generating higher profits as costs are low. On the other hand, free-range farming requires a lot more land and is more labour-intensive, but the products of free-range farming can be sold at a higher price and animals have a better quality of life. You need to be aware of the behavioural indicators of poor animal welfare. The first of these is stereotyping. This is a behaviour which involves the unusual repetitive movement, such as constantly pacing back and forth. The second is misdirected behaviour. This is a normal behaviour displayed in a different or inappropriate situation, such as feather pecking amongst battery hens. Battery hens are those who are crammed into a very small area and often show signs of distress. The third behavioural indicator of poor welfare is failure in sexual or parental behaviour. Reproductive output is usually a measure of animal welfare, and those who are facing poor welfare will either not reproduce, or if they do reproduce, they will neglect their young. Finally, altered levels of activity. These can either be abnormally low levels of activity, referred to as apathy, or extremely high levels of activity, known as hysteria. This is often seen in battery hens, where they all suffer from hysteria and end up trampling on each other, hurting and killing each other due to being packed so tightly in a small space. Now it's time to have a go yourself. Use the information on the previous slides to answer these mock questions. Each is worth 4 marks, and when you are ready to mark your answers, press play. Okay, let's mark your answers. Here is a mock answer scheme to the previous extended response question. Let's look at A. Discuss the chemical and biological control of weeds and pests. This is a mock answer scheme that has been created based on past paper questions from the SQA. For each bullet point that you have successfully written, award yourself a mark. If there is the word "and" bold and underlined, you must have both parts of the sentence to get the mark. Any forward slash shows alternative words you can use. So for example, the first sentence says weeds compete with / inhibit crop plants. You could have the term compete with, or you could have the term inhibit. You can only be awarded a maximum of 4 marks, even if you have scored more. But remember, in the exam, write as much as you know, not only 4 marks, and then stop. Here is the answers to the next question. Discuss the indicators of poor animal welfare. Remember, you must have both parts of the sentence to get the mark if the word "and" is included. Also, remember the forward slash contains alternative words that can be used. If there is brackets around the word, such as unusually in the bottom bullet point, this word is optional. Again, give yourself a mark out of 4. Remember, you will only be expected to answer one of these questions. So pick one of the questions that you are going to answer and make sure you revise your answer. Let's now go on and have a look at the 2 8-mark extended response question options. Your options are either metabolic pathways, which says you should know features of metabolic pathways, types of metabolic reactions, and proteins embedded in membranes in detail, or metabolism in conformers and regulators. You should know regulators and thermoregulation in detail. Again, I am going to talk you through how you would answer each of these questions, and you are going to do some practice extended response questions at the end with marking schemes. Let's go on and firstly have a look at metabolic pathways, metabolic reactions, and proteins. So firstly, what is a metabolic pathway? A metabolic pathway is a series of chemical reactions occurring in a cell. There are many metabolic pathways that are occurring in your body every single second. At the bottom of this slide, you will see an example of a metabolic pathway. So you can see that starting molecule A is converted by enzyme 1 to molecule B, which is then converted by enzyme 2 to molecule C, which is then converted by enzyme 3 to molecule D. Molecule D would be the product of that metabolic pathway. Metabolic pathways, as you can see in the diagram below, are controlled by the presence or absence of particular enzymes. Metabolic pathways are often reversible. However, some can be irreversible, so they have irreversible steps, and sometimes they have the ability to take alternative routes if their original route is blocked. Let's now have a look at the control of metabolic pathways. Metabolic pathways are usually controlled by a process called feedback inhibition. Feedback inhibition occurs when the end product in a metabolic pathway reaches a critical or a high concentration. The end product then inhibits an earlier enzyme, blocking the pathway and preventing further synthesis of the end product. So for example, in this metabolic pathway, if product D reached a critical concentration, it would inhibit enzyme 1 and it would prevent further synthesis of product D. This is beneficial as it prevents your body using energy to make a product there is already an excess of. Let's now have a look at different types of metabolic reactions. We are going to have a look at two different types of metabolic reactions: anabolic reactions and catabolic reactions. You need to be aware of the difference between these two types of reactions. The diagram at the bottom of the page is showing an anabolic reaction. An anabolic reaction requires energy to build up small molecules into large molecules, such as the synthesis of a protein from amino acids. So remember, smaller molecules are getting built up into larger molecules and energy is required. So from this diagram at the bottom, you can see smaller molecules plus energy is getting built up into a larger molecule. Catabolic reactions then. Catabolic reactions break down large molecules into smaller molecules, and in doing so, they release energy. So if you have a look at the diagram at the bottom of the page, this is a catabolic reaction. You can see there is a large molecule getting broken down into smaller molecules, and energy is being released. An example of a catabolic reaction would be cellular respiration. Let's now have a look at the last part of this, proteins embedded in membranes. Now, from National 5, you should be aware that the cell membrane is composed of both proteins and phospholipids. So in this diagram, the big black and yellow chunks, they are proteins, and the red and pink ones that look like little matchsticks, they are phospholipids. The proteins in the membrane have a variety of functions, including pore proteins, pump proteins, and enzymes. You need to be aware of the functions of each of these proteins. Let's firstly look at pore proteins. Pore proteins are responsible for moving molecules across the cell membrane by diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of molecules from a high concentration to a low concentration, or down the concentration gradient. On the other hand, pump proteins are responsible for moving molecules or ions across the cell membrane by active transport. Active transport is the movement of molecules from a low concentration to a high concentration, or against a concentration gradient. Enzymes in membranes, they catalyze or speed up specific chemical reactions. So make sure you are aware of the roles of each of the three proteins found in the cell membrane. Let's now go on and have a look at your second 8-mark option, regulators and thermoregulation. So let's firstly talk about what we mean by the term regulator. We are talking about the ability of an organism to maintain its metabolic rate. Now, metabolic rate is affected by external abiotic factors. Remember, abiotic factors are non-living factors such as pH, temperature, and salinity. Regulators have the ability to maintain their internal environment regardless of external environment. Us humans, we would be an example of a regulator. The benefit of being a regulator is they can occupy a wide range of possible ecological niches. However, in turn, this regulation requires energy to achieve homeostasis, so they have high metabolic costs. By homeostasis, we mean the ability to maintain a constant internal environment. Let's now spend some time talking about thermoregulation. So thermoregulation is the ability of an organism to keep its body temperature within certain boundaries, even when the surrounding temperature is very different. Why is thermoregulation important then? Thermoregulation is important for two things: optimum enzyme activity, as well as high diffusion rates. Thermoregulation occurs by a process that we call negative feedback. So what is meant by this term negative feedback? When the condition changes, the opposite effect is produced by the body to return itself to normal. So an example would be when temperature increases, the body responds by cooling itself down. This would be an example of negative feedback control. How does your body detect then that your temperature has increased? The hypothalamus is the temperature monitoring centre inside your brain. The hypothalamus contains thermoreceptors. Thermoreceptors are responsible for detecting changes in the temperature of your blood or the surface temperature of your body. Once a change in temperature has been detected by the hypothalamus, information is then communicated by electrical impulses through your nerves to effectors. Effectors bring about a corrective response to return your temperature to normal. Let's have a little overview at what would happen if there was an increase in body temperature. So we can see here that we have a normal body temperature of 37 degrees. Let's just say there is an increase in body temperature detected by your hypothalamus. Okay, so that is going to be detected by the thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus. Once this hypothalamus has detected that increase, information is going to be sent by electrical impulses in nerves to effectors. Effectors are then going to bring about a response to the messages received. So what are these responses? Well, if your temperature has increased, the responses will include sweating, vasodilation, which we're going to talk about in a second, and the third one is decreased metabolic rate. Okay, so familiarise yourself with this flowchart. You are more than welcome to copy this down into your notes, and we are going to have a little look at the responses in more detail, because you cannot simply just write the term sweating or vasodilation. You need to elaborate on this. So let's now elaborate on what will happen if your body temperature increases. So the first response will be sweating. So sweating involves body heat being used to evaporate water in sweat, which in turn cools the skin and returns your body temperature to normal. Secondly, vasodilation. So vasodilation involves the dilation or the widening of blood vessels. So the blood vessels that supply blood to the skin dilate or widen, which increases the amount of blood flowing to the skin. This then increases heat loss by radiation and returns your body temperature to normal. You may see that when you are warm, you might notice that your cheeks get quite red, and this is due to vasodilation increasing the blood flowing to your skin to increase heat loss by radiation. The third response to your body temperature increasing will be a decreased metabolic rate. So a decreased metabolic rate means that less heat will be produced by your body, and in turn returning your body temperature to normal. So make sure you have these written down and you are aware of the responses to an increase in body temperature. Make sure you are able to elaborate on these and explain how they return your body temperature to normal. Let's now have a look at the opposite. So let's have a look at what happens when your body temperature decreases. So again, you are more than welcome to copy this flowchart down, but let's have a little look. So normal body temperature, 37 degrees. If there is a decrease in body temperature detected, the exact same process is going to be followed. It is going to be detected by the thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus. Information will then be sent by electrical impulses in nerves to effectors, and a response is going to be brought about by these messages received. So what are the responses then to a decrease in body temperature? So the first response is shivering, something you're probably very familiar with. The second one is vasoconstriction. Again, we will go on and elaborate on these on the next slide. The next one is increased metabolic rate, and the last one is hair erector muscles contracting. Again, you must be able to elaborate on these and you cannot simply just write them down. So let's look at how they return your body temperature to normal. So if your body temperature has decreased, what is your body going to do? The first response is shivering. So muscle contractions are going to generate heat when you shiver, and that is going to return your body temperature to normal. The second one is vasoconstriction. This is the opposite of vasodilation. So in vasoconstriction, the blood vessels that supply blood to the skin constrict, or they narrow, reducing the amount of blood flow to the skin. If you reduce the amount of blood flow to the skin, this will decrease heat loss by radiation and again return your body temperature to normal. Next, hair erector muscles contract, so the hairs will stand on end, mostly on your arms, and in turn this will trap a layer of insulating air, returning your body temperature to normal. And lastly, increased metabolic rate. So if the metabolic rate is increased, then more heat will be produced. Again, make sure you are aware of these responses to a decrease in body temperature. Make sure you are able to elaborate on these and you are not simply just writing the word shivering, but you are explaining how that returns your body temperature to normal. Okay, let's now go on and put this information into practice. So using the information on the previous slides, answer the following 8-mark questions. Pause the video to complete this task and press play to mark your answers. Now, on each question, you can see you have the option of A or B. For each one, the first one has 3 different subheadings and the second one has 2 different subheadings. For each subheading, it tells you how many marks will be awarded for this subheading. Again, these are just mock questions based on previous SQA exams. This might not be directly related or directly the same as the one you will receive in the SQA exam with regards to the mark allocation, but this is just a mock practice. So pause the video, and once you're ready to mark your answers, press play. Okay, let's mark the first question. Now, this is a lot more detail than the 4-mark question, but this is worth 8 marks. So for each bullet point, you will be awarded a mark. Now it tells you, so for example, part 1, features of metabolic pathways. At the end, it says max 2. This means you can only receive maximum 2 marks for this part of your answer. Even if you have given all 4 bullet points, you can still only receive maximum 2 marks. So you would be awarded a mark for stating that metabolic pathways are controlled by the presence or absence of enzymes. You will get a mark for stating any 2 of metabolic pathways having reversible steps, irreversible steps, and alternative routes. You will be awarded a mark for stating that metabolic pathways can be controlled by feedback inhibition, and a mark for saying when the end product reaches a critical concentration, it inhibits an earlier enzyme. Again, I would not encourage you to only write 2 bullet points for this. If you know to write more, then write as much as you know. For the second subheading, types of metabolic reactions, you will receive a mark for stating that anabolism is a synthesis or build-up reaction, or anabolism is a build-up of molecules, or anabolism is where simple molecules are built up into more complex or large molecules. If you have used the term anabolic reaction instead of anabolism, that's okay. You will also receive a mark for stating that anabolic reactions or anabolism requires energy. And you will then receive a mark for stating that a catabolic reaction or catabolism is the breakdown degradation of molecules, or catabolism is a breakdown reaction, or catabolism is where complex or large molecules are changed into more simple molecules. Again, remember the / shows alternative words that can be used. The 4th mark will be for stating that energy is released in a catabolic reaction. You can receive maximum 4 marks for this section. Let's now have a look at the answer scheme to the 3rd part, proteins embedded in membranes. So again, you will receive maximum 2 marks for this. So you will receive 1 mark for stating that pore proteins are responsible for moving molecules across the cell membrane by diffusion or down a concentration gradient. You will receive another mark for stating that pump proteins are responsible for moving molecules or ions across the cell membrane by active transport or against a concentration gradient. And the 3rd mark for stating that enzymes catalyze or speed up specific reactions. Again, this is worth maximum 2 marks. So add your marks together from the first one, the second one, and the 3rd one, and give yourself a total out of 8. Let's now correct the answer to the second one. Again, this is just a mock question and the mark allocation might be different in the SQA exam, but this is just based on past papers. So discuss metabolism under the following headings: regulators for 2 marks and thermoregulation for 6 marks. You will be awarded a mark for stating that regulators can maintain, control, or regulate their metabolism, metabolic rate, internal environment, regardless of external conditions. Remember, the / means that you can have any of the alternative words. You will also receive a mark for stating that regulators require energy or have higher metabolic costs for homeostasis or negative feedback, and another mark for stating that regulators have wide ecological niches. You can receive maximum 2 marks from your answer to the first part of the question. Let's now mark the second part of the question. So you will be awarded 1 mark for stating that the hypothalamus is the temperature monitoring centre. Another mark for stating that thermoreceptors detect change in temperature, and another mark for stating that information is communicated by electrical impulses through nerves to effectors or skin. The word electrical impulses is underlined, which means it must be in your answer to get the award for that sentence. In terms of the responses to increase in temperature and decrease in temperature, you will see that each of them says max 2. So you can only be awarded maximum 2 from increase responses and maximum 2 for decrease responses. So responses to increase in temperature, you could have sweating, vasodilation, or decreased metabolic rate. You must, however, have the other part of the sentence to be awarded that mark. So you must have sweating, and body heat is used to evaporate water in sweat, cooling the skin. In terms of responses to a decrease in temperature, you have 4 options here, and again, you can be awarded maximum 2. Give yourself a mark out of 8 for this essay, and make sure anything that you are missing, you have filled into your answer. Now remember, you will only be asked to answer 1 of these 8-mark questions. So pick which one you are going to answer and make sure you have revised it thoroughly. In terms of your next steps, I've already mentioned that use the information given to decide which topics you are going to focus on for your exam. You need to pick 1 from the 4-mark question and 1 from the 8-mark question. Once you have decided which one you are going to answer from the 4-mark question and which one you are going to answer from the 8-mark question, practice writing out your mock answers based on these topics. This could involve trying to write it without looking at your notes and then marking it. And then once you have done it once, do it again. Your answers can be given in bullet points as long as they are explained fully. So each bullet point must be a sentence explaining fully and not just 1 mark. If that helps you structure your essay better, that is fine. You could also use flashcards or mind maps to help you practice your mock answers, but ultimately the most important thing is to be able to write out your answer fully before the exam to the best of your abilities and making sure that you are getting as many marks possible. So let's revisit our learning intentions. Our learning intentions were to develop our understanding of a variety of key areas, including crop protection, animal welfare, metabolic pathways, and metabolism in conformers and regulators. We were also enhancing our confidence when answering extended response questions on these key areas. So by now, you should be able to explain the chemical and biological control of weeds and pests. You should be able to describe in detail the aspects of animal welfare. You should be able to describe features of metabolic pathways, types of metabolic pathways, and the roles of proteins embedded in membranes. And you should be able to describe regulators and explain the process of thermoregulation. So, one last word. I hope this session has helped you feel more confident in preparing for your SQA Higher Biology Extended Response questions. Remember, you have been given extra support in preparation for your SQA Higher Biology exam. Make sure you prepare for these questions, as they are worth a total of 12 marks. That 12 marks could be the difference between an A grade and a B grade, a C grade and a B grade, and so on. Remember, you will be asked to answer one 4-mark question and one 8-mark question. Thank you for listening to this lesson, and I hope it has provided you with the support that you require for your higher biology exam.